disappearance of Jim Sullivan. Pull up a chair, because this one sits at the precise intersection of the explicable and the inexplicable, and it has never moved from that position in 50 years. It is the kind of story that begins with a man driving alone through the American Southwest and ends with a gray Volkswagen Beetle abandoned on the side of a New Mexico highway, and a guitar case in a motel room, and no Jim Sullivan anywhere. Not alive, not dead, not anywhere the decades of searching have been able to locate. What makes it different from other disappearances is the album. The album changes everything, or it changes nothing, depending on what you believe about coincidence. Part 1. The Man. Jim Sullivan was born in 1940 in the Boston area, and by the mid-1960s had made his way to Los Angeles, as musicians did in that era, drawn by the specific gravity of a city that was, for a decade or so, the center of the American sound. He was handsome in the specific way of the period, dark-haired, lean, with the easy physical confidence of someone who knew how to hold a room. He played guitar. He sang. His voice was a warm baritone, unhurried, slightly melancholy in its default register, the kind of voice that sounds like it is telling you something private. He worked the Los Angeles circuit through the late 1960s, playing clubs, doing session work, building the kind of career that exists perpetually one break away from the next level. He was good. People who knew him said so consistently. He was not, by the metrics the industry applied, successful in the way that translated into commercial recognition. But he was known. He had friends in the business. He had champions. In 1969, he recorded his debut album. It was called UFO. It was released on a small label. It did not sell. It was, by the standards of the recording industry, a failure. It was also, in retrospect, something else entirely. Part 2. The album. UFO is a folk rock record in the style of its era. Acoustic guitar, orchestral arrangements, the warm production of a late 60s Los Angeles studio. It is, by any honest assessment, a good album. The songs are well constructed. Sullivan's voice carries them with the quiet authority of someone who believes in what he is singing, and the arrangements support rather than overwhelm. But the lyrics of UFO describe, across its 11 tracks, a recurring set of images and themes that become, in the context of what happened 6 years later, deeply uncomfortable to listen to. A man alone on a highway. A man who cannot find his way home. A man observed by something that is not human, in language that is elliptical rather than direct, suggesting rather than stating, the way the best unsettling writing always does. A man who is moving towards something he cannot name and away from something he cannot return to. The album's title track describes an encounter with a light in the sky above an empty road. The final track describes a departure, not a death, not a destination, simply a leaving from everything familiar towards something unspecified, without explanation. The album sat in obscurity for 30 years before anyone connected it to the disappearance. When they did, the connection was difficult to dismiss. Part 3. The Drive. By 1975, Jim Sullivan's Los Angeles chapter was closing. The decade that had made his career possible was over. The industry had moved on. His marriage was ending. His son was young. The specific combination of professional disappointment and personal dissolution that the early 1970s administered to many careers of the late 1960s had found him, as it found so many others, and left him in a position he had not anticipated and could not sustain. In late February or early March of 1975, Jim Sullivan decided to drive to Nashville. The reasoning, as reported by those who spoke to him in his final days in Los Angeles, was straightforward. Nashville was where country music lived. Country music was a form he could work in, and a fresh start in a different city was the specific solution his circumstances required. He packed his Volkswagen Beetle. He packed his guitar. He said his goodbyes, and he drove east. On the night of March 4th, 1975, he stopped at a motel in Santa Rosa, New Mexico. Santa Rosa is a small town on the old Route 66 corridor, approximately halfway between Albuquerque and the Texas border, a gas and sleep stop, the kind of place people pass through rather than arrive at. Sullivan checked in. He spoke to people at the motel that evening. His demeanor, according to those who later gave accounts, was calm and pleasant. He had dinner. He went to his room. In the morning, he was gone. Part 4. What was left? The Volkswagen Beetle was found approximately 20 miles outside Santa Rosa, pulled over on the side of the highway. The engine was off. The keys were inside. The car was locked. Sullivan's guitar was in the motel room. His personal belongings were in the motel room. His wallet, containing money and identification, was left behind. He had taken nothing that a man intending to leave would take. He had taken nothing that a man facing an emergency would think to take. He had simply walked away from the car and not come back. The surrounding terrain is high desert, open, flat in some directions, broken by low ridges and arroyos in others. The vast landscape of eastern New Mexico, beautiful by day and deeply unforgiving after dark. In March, the nights are cold. The distances between points of civilization are significant. The FBI investigated. The investigation produced no leads. There were no witnesses to what happened between the motel and the abandoned car. There were no witnesses to anything that occurred after. A ranch in the area was connected to a group that some investigators described as a cult, and this detail entered the case file and has never been fully substantiated or eliminated. The ranch was searched. Nothing was found. No body has ever been recovered. No credible sighting has ever been reported. Jim Sullivan has not used a bank account, a social security number, or any other traceable identity marker in the 50 years since March 1975. He is legally dead. The law requires a declaration eventually. It does not require an explanation. Part 5. The Record. Here is what makes the Jim Sullivan case different from other disappearances of the era. In the decades after 1975, as the case quietly accumulated the specific dust that unsolved cases accumulate, someone went back and listened to UFO with the knowledge of what had happened to the man who made it, and found the album impossible to listen to the same way. The images and the lyrics, the empty highway, the man driving alone, the lights in the sky above the desert, the departure that has no destination, are not unusual for the folk rock tradition of the late 1960s. Artists of that era wrote about roads and journeys and losses and arrivals constantly, in the idiom of a decade that fetishized movement and transformation. In isolation, no individual lyric on UFO requires any explanation beyond its era. But the album was called UFO, and the man who made it drove into the New Mexico desert on Route 66 and was never found. And the track, the one about the departure, the one about leaving without explanation, ends not with resolution, but with a held note, a voice, and then silence. Whether Jim Sullivan wrote an album that accidentally prefigured his own disappearance, or whether UFO is the artistic expression of a man who had already decided something that he had not yet acted on, or whether the connection between the album and the disappearance is a pattern imposed by the human mind on events that have no actual relationship, is a question that 50 years have not resolved. The album was reissued in 2010 by a small label interested in lost Americana. It found, for the first time, an audience. The people who discovered it described it as haunting. They used that word specifically, and they used it before many of them knew the story of the man who made it. There are theories about Jim Sullivan that range from the mundane to the extraordinary. That he walked into the desert deliberately and died of exposure, his remains scattered by time and wildlife across the high desert terrain. That he assumed a new identity and lived out a quiet life somewhere he was not known. That the ranch and its inhabitants were involved in his disappearance in ways the investigation failed to uncover. That the album's themes were not coincidental. That last theory is the one nobody says out loud. Not directly. Because saying it directly would require you to state, plainly, what you think the title UFO meant to the man who gave it to his only record. The record he made 6 years before he drove alone into the New Mexico desert on a clear March night and left his guitar in a motel room and his car on the side of the highway, and himself nowhere that anyone has looked. And the desert outside Santa Rosa is very flat, and the nights there are very dark, and the stars above eastern New Mexico, in March, with no light pollution and no cloud cover, are close enough that a man standing alone on the highway in 1975, looking up at them, might have felt something. Until next time, sleep well, my friend.